Hi everybody and welcome back to Sweatpants BI. In this video we're going to continue our work on our airline customer satisfaction survey infographic, this time focusing on a very important metric for customer satisfaction, namely Net Promoter Score. We're going to talk about what Net Promoter Score means, how to calculate it, and we're also going to talk about some ideas for visualizing it within the context of our fake airline dataset. Now we're ready to start visualizing Net Promoter Score. And in order to wrap our heads around Net Promoter Score, let's revisit our data view. And again, what we're really focusing on here is this column. How likely are you to recommend us? And I thought that it would be worth pulling up a really good article from Qualtrics here. Just to sort of demonstrate exactly what we're trying to do. I like the graphics that they use in this article, and they have a long, detailed explanation of how Net Promoter Score works. And fundamentally, this is the question that sort of sets off the conversation for Net Promoter Score. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely is it that you would recommend this brand to a friend or colleague? And of course, in our data set, how likely are you to recommend us is essentially the exact same thing. And of course, the responses range from 0 to 10, even though it looks like all of our responses spanning 130,000 rows of data are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So nobody gave us a 0, 1, or a 2, which I guess is a good thing. So let's go ahead and minimize this and return to the Qualtrics article. And what we're really trying to identify is of the people that scored us on a range of 0 to 10 in terms of being likely to recommend us to someone, how many were 9s and 10s or promoters, and how many were 0 to 6 or detractors. The 7s and the 8s are there in the data, but they get kind of set aside for Net Promoter Score. What we're really interested in understanding is who are our promoters, or the people that gave us a 9 or a 10. In other words, the people who are most likely to be champions or cheerleaders of our brand and try to encourage other people to fly us because they love our brand or they had amazing experiences. And how many people out there are likely to actively hurt our brand by encouraging people not to fly us, telling their friends and their family and their colleagues, oh, I would never fly that airline again because I had a just horrendous experience with them. Net Promoter Score helps us understand sort of sentiment around our brand by taking people who responded to our survey and bucketing them into these groups of detractors, passives, and promoters. And of course, the Net Promoter Score itself is a fairly simple formula. It's just the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors. So let's go ahead and head back to Power BI, and we're going to start actually calculating the DAX measures for promoters, passives, detractors, and NPS. So let's go ahead and start by finding our promoters. So this is just going to be a promoter count. And this is going to be, we can just reference our response count formula that we already created. But this time we're going to filter our airline passenger satisfaction data based on how likely are you to recommend us being greater than or equal to 9. And then I'm just going to copy this DAX because the other formulas that I'm going to create are very, very similar. And now I'm going to create a new measure called detractor count. And this is going to be everyone, if you'll remember the Qualtrics article, everyone who rated us less than or equal to a 6. And even though we're not going to use this measure probably in our report, let's just go ahead and create another measure for everyone who gave us a 7 or an 8. Now that we have our detractors, passives, and promoters, we're going to need the two elements that make up our NPS score. So this is going to be percent promoters. And this is going to be a division between our promoter count and our response count. In other words, what percentage of all the responses that we got for the survey were promoters, And we're also going to need percent detractors. And this tells us what percentage of all the responses that we got were detractors. Now, before we calculate NPS, let's go ahead and just make sure that these are working okay. So we have a promoter count here. We have our detractor count here, which is honestly pretty high. And let's go ahead and add a matrix so that I can add year from our date column, or date table rather. And I'm going to sort this 2022 to 2021. And immediately I'm noticing that, oh, it looks like the news is possibly going to be really, really good for 2022. And notice that in 2021, promoters and detractors were pretty evenly split, but there's a huge difference in 2022. So hopefully that will mean that our NPS score is going to be night and day for 2022 compared to 2021. So that is going to inform, obviously, a huge portion of the infographic that we come up with here. If our Net Promoter Score is as much better as I think it's going to be for 2022 compared to 2021, that's your headline. That is the story that we want to hammer home in this infographic. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Now let's go ahead and put percent promoters and percent detractors in here. Okay, and you can see, let's go ahead and convert our percent detractors and percent promoters to percentages. And now really all we have to do here is for 2022, we're going to subtract percent detractors from percent promoters and do the same thing for 2021. So our Net Promoter Score is literally just going to be our percent promoters minus our percent detractors. Let's go ahead and put that over here. And you can see our Net Promoter Score for 2022 is a huge improvement over the previous year. Now, sometimes I see Net Promoter Score presented as a percentage, but I'll be honest, it is fairly rare. So what I'm going to do for this calculation is I'm going to convert it back to a whole number here, and I'm going to wrap this subtraction here, and I'm going to multiply it by 100. And this makes much more sense in representing our Net Promoter Score. Now, it does bear stating here that yes, Net Promoter Score can be negative. And of course, if you have a negative Net Promoter Score, then what that's really telling you is that more often than not, the people who are responding to your survey or who have, who would have a comment on your brand are more likely than not actually hurting your brand and are more likely than not recommending your brand or your service to other people. So obviously, it's important that Net Promoter Score be positive, and by and large, we want to see that number get as high as we can get it. So you can see here that in 2021, Net Promoter Score was just barely positive, sort of implying probably a fairly even split between people who would recommend the brand and people who would not. 47 is a much, much, much better Net Promoter Score. Now we're getting into the category of actually having a very, very good brand and fantastic user experiences and people who are champions and advocate. You want this number to be as high as possible because that is telling you how many of your customers are likely to tell other people to check out your brand and your airline. So this is just night and day, this comparison. And while, I guess it's good that it's positive in 2021, I don't think that anybody would be happy with only having 1 as your Net Promoter Score. 47, however, this jump is something that we definitely want to talk about big time in our infographic. So, of course, when we get to our Net Promoter Score section of our report, front and center, we are definitely going to want to have a specific call out between the difference in Net Promoter Score for 2022 and Net Promoter Score for 2021. So now that we have our Net Promoter Score calculations, how do we want to visualize this information? Because once again, the main thing that we want to highlight, since this is an infographic and we're trying to tell a story here, is we want to really sell this huge improvement between our 2022 NPS and our 2021 NPS, which was, just barely in the positive. So our first instinct might be to just take our Net Promoter Score and start visualizing it by a whole bunch of different attributes from our data. Maybe we want to see what the difference between 2021 and 2022 looks for age group. Right now we just have all NPS. Maybe we want to directly compare years. So let's add that to our legend. Of course, our ordering for the age group is still kind of screwed up here. So let's go ahead and sort our x-axis by age group. And let's sort it in ascending order so that you can see it looks like NPS was negative in 2021 for, looks like demographics below the age of, 40. Then for people in their 40s and 50s, it was positive even in 2021. But then for people in their 60s and up, Net Promoter Score tended to be negative. So it looks like we were doing a pretty good job sort of catering to people in their 40s and 50s, maybe even in their 30s. But, for people kind of at the fringes in terms of age for respondents to the survey, Net Promoter Score was pretty low. And so we did a great job of improving that in 2022. But, what if somebody wants to see this broken down not by age, but by class? Or maybe they want to see it broken down by the type of travel. Or maybe they even want to see the difference in Net Promoter Score broken down for people who were polled on the comfort of their seats. There's all kinds of different directions that we could take this. But, we have, a whole bunch of different fields that maybe we want to compare for Net Promoter Score, and yet we only have so much space allocated in our infographic to really talk about Net Promoter Score. So just because this is an infographic doesn't mean it can't be interactive. Obviously, if our goal is to include this infographic in like an email or to print it out or something, then no, that's not going to be interactive. But within the context of the Power BI tool itself, there are some ways that we can make this data and this comparison a little bit more fun and engaging for the user. And I like to use something called field parameters, which I'll get to here in just a moment. But the other thing that I want to do real fast is, yes, using this clustered bar chart and breaking everything out by year makes it, easy to sort of compare year by year. But maybe we also want to give users the ability to quickly see the biggest change in year over year Net Promoter Score. So, oftentimes when you see year over year, comparisons for things like sales or revenue, it's percent increases. That doesn't make as much sense for Net Promoter Score, considering that in 2021, Net Promoter Score was 1, and for 2022, it's 47. Wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to try to represent that as, a hundreds or thousands percent improvement. So our year over year change and Net Promoter Score is just going to be a simple calculation of Net Promoter Score for 2022. So we're just calculating our Net Promoter Score for the year 2022. And from that, we're going to subtract our 2021 Net Promoter Score to get a raw NPS year over year change. And we're going to add that to this section. And I'm going to get rid of year because now year no longer makes sense. You can see that everything is even for 2021 and 2022. And that's because our measure is already filtering based on those 2 years. So we're just going to lose year entirely from our legend so that we can see, for people that evaluated the comfort of our seats, where the biggest change in raw Net Promoter Score was between 2021 and 2022. Now, obviously, there's not all that much that I would expect to be terribly different or variable between our 2021 and our 2022 Net Promoter Score for this data set, just because, as I keep saying, this is a fake data set and all of the values are randomized. So we're probably going to see a lot of instances where the change between the change in Net Promoter Score between male and female or returning and first-time customer are almost exactly the same. because all of this data was randomized. So at the level of different attributes, Net Promoter Score year over year is probably not going to be very, very different. Here, for these values that range from 0 to 10, you might see a little bit more variance just because there are more values. And we would expect Net Promoter Score to be lower for people who are already, not happy with the service that they received. So let's go ahead now and get to, now that we've got a couple of base visuals laid out, including some cards that we can use to really highlight the difference between 2022 and 2021 Net Promoter Score at a very high level. Let's go ahead and build in some field parameter functionality to help give us some flexibility with these two visuals. Again, these two visuals are intentionally very, very similar. One is showing the year-over-year comparison side by side, and the other is just showing the raw change, which makes it a little bit easier to see where Net Promoter Score improved the most than this chart here, where people have to do a little bit of math. So we're going to go to Modeling, and we're going to add a new field parameter. So go to New Parameter, click on Fields, and we're going to call this new parameter table NPS parameter. And all we're going to do from this is we're going to select the fields that we want to compare year over year Net Promoter Score for. And I'm going to start with just our demographic stuff. So let's start with age group, gender, type of travel, class, and customer type. And if you want to reorganize these, it's no problem at all. Literally, you just kind of drag and put these in the order that you want. And the order that we're putting these fields over here is also the order that they're going to appear in the eventual slicer that we're going to add to this page that will let users sort of swap back and forth between these different categories in their visuals. I'll show you more on that in just a moment. For the rest of these, what we're trying to do is, for all of the columns that are basically the scores of 0 to 10 for different aspects of their experience, what we want to do is try to put these in the order of their actual experience at the airport. So first, I'm just going to select all of the columns that I know I'm going to need. And then we can worry about sorting these. So baggage handling is going to be one of the last things that a passenger experiences at the airport. One of the first things that they're going to do is evaluate the different departure and arrival times. Ease of online booking comes very, very early in the process. Check-in service does as well, as does gate location, as does the onboarding service, which is the actual act of getting on the plane. As soon as someone is on the plane, they're evaluating things like cleanliness and seat comfort and legroom service. So I'm going to go ahead and put cleanliness with seat comfort and legroom service. I don't need flight distance. I selected that by accident. Then we're going to evaluate things like in-flight service, food and drink, in-flight entertainment, in-flight Wi-Fi service, baggage handling, and I also have online boarding here, which I need to move closer to the top. So online boarding. Okay, that should work for now. It may not be completely perfect. Maybe we could have organized things or ordered them in a different way. But in the interest of time, let's go ahead and just create our new parameter here. Immediately, this creates this nice long slicer over here full of all kinds of different dimensions from my data. And then I can go over here, and instead of using seat comfort in my x-axis, I'm actually going to use my NPS parameter here. I'll go ahead and add that. I'm going to go ahead and select age first. Then I'm going to go ahead and select my field parameter for the other visual here so that I can see where my biggest increases were. And now, every time I flip through, real quickly, let me go ahead and change the sort ordering over here. But now, every time I go through different layers from my data, you can see that I have 2 bar charts that are updating instantly so that I can compare Net Promoter Score across almost any dimension from my data that I would be interested in comparing. So this helps us perform a whole bunch of different explorations of the improvement in our Net Promoter Score across almost anything from our data set that someone would want to see, while also preserving a fairly small amount of space in our infographic. So, of course, this is all about just trying to consolidate and relay as much detail as we can in a small amount of space so that someone who is reading this infographic can sort of quickly digest the headlines and then explore for fun in other areas